Maybe you've experienced an issue like this or similar, where you have an image, you spend a lot of time getting rid of the background of the image so that you can use it on a website or inside of another image. So you go ahead, you save it out, and you think, well, JPEG makes sense, right? I know I can use that on the web. And then you go ahead and place it on your website, and I'm going to place this image inside this website with this yellowish background. And what happened to all the work we did erasing the pixels? Well, what you really wanted was to save that in an image format that supported transparency so that you would get something more like that. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the major choices that you have for images in web design. First, let's talk about just a couple common sense things to keep in mind as you work. One is always have a backup of your image, which could be as simple as in Photoshop just going to image and duplicate. And there you have opened right in Photoshop a copy of the image. And you can close that out, save it in the folder that you were working in. You can also make copies in the folder like I've shown you before. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other is as you're working, progressing on the image, like let's say we need to add a bunch of detail in here or whatever it is, and we're going to be working on it for the next couple days, and it's an important image for us. What you want to do along the way is save this as a PSD file. So when we go File, Save As, we see the format. It'll probably default in the format that it was. And I'm going to guess that 90% of the time you either pull an image off the web, especially if you take it from your camera, high chance that you're going to be working with a JPEG. I'm going to suggest to you that you save out as Photoshop. The main reason is that if you save as a JPEG, as soon as you click Save, it asks you about the JPEG options, and one of them is the quality issue. The higher the quality, the larger the file size, and it shows you the file size here is going to be like 72K. If I bring it down smaller, it's like half the size. But that comes at a cost, and it's a compression that makes the image work. But JPEG's compression is what they call a lossy compression. This is further compounded that if you keep working on this image and you keep applying compression to it, you could end up hurting the image. So file size is not nearly as big of an issue as it used to be years ago. Just save as the PSD option. The other thing that the PSD option does is it supports the layers, so you could have a bunch of adjustment layers and fill layers and whatever. So let's say I've been working along on this PSD image, made some adjustments, and I'm going to get rid of the white background, and I'll just tell you real quick what I do to do that. I just double click on the background layer and then click OK. That gets rid of the lock on it and makes it so it's no longer like a true background. And then I'm just going to grab under this section over here the magic wand tool, and even just with the defaults that this should work against a white background. So I just click here, selects all the white, then I just hit delete, and when you see this checkerboard pattern, that lets you know that you're at the background or beyond the background. That lets you know that you're seeing through this. And then let's see, just to make it a little more interesting, give me some layers. I'm clicking here to add a layer. Then I'll just take this layer, fill it in with kind of a light color so that it doesn't make that shadow look too awful that we have, because otherwise we'd have to go in and do some work on this shadow because it's kind of harsh right there. I'll fill it in with that color by doing Option Delete, and then oops, I had this selection made, so actually I want to undo that. I'm going to Command Z to undo that. I'm going to Command D to get rid of that outline that was made. Now I'll fill the layer, Option Delete, and then I'll just simply drag the layer below. Okay, so once again, I'll save this, and I'm working as a PSD, so no issues here with compression or anything like that. So now I'm at the point where I want to put this on my website. So what format do I save it as? Well, we have basically three choices for images, for bitmap images. We have a JPEG, a PNG, and a GIF. And I'm going to do this comparison of now. So if you compare me, what I'm telling you, to some older videos, you might hear a lot more information and arguments for GIF, but I'm going to tell you basically where we're at right now in web design. So the pros to a JPEG is, for an image, like detailed image, it's typically going to be your smaller file size. The cons are, as I just explained, it's a lossy compression. Also, as you saw in my opening example, JPEGs do not support transparency. Then we have the option of a PNG or a PNG file. Pros, it supports transparency. Con is that it's usually a little bit larger than a JPEG if you compare it to the normal PNG file, and we'll talk about these differences in just a second. A GIF, the only pro to a GIF is that it can be animated. So sometimes you'll see these little icons that, like the smile grows on them, or their eyes are blinking, or, some little goofy thing like that. That may be actual animation via CSS and HTML, but it could just be a simple little animated GIF. So the cons, other than just a simple animated graphic, there is no reason to use GIF anymore. So let's look at these three formats in more detail back in Photoshop. And to explain this better, I think what I'll do is I'll turn this background layer off so that we can talk about transparency. And then I'm going to use this legacy, go to File, Export, and save for web legacy. The thing that's nice about this is if we choose 4 up like this, it lets us compare some formats and make our discussion a little better. So we'll start with GIF, just so we can get that one out of the way. I have this set up to 4 up, and I'll click on this image right over here. I'll change this to GIF. GIF used to be our only option on the web for transparency. But the problem with the GIF overall is that it only supports at max 256 colors, which works fine for an image that only has a red item in it. But if you imagine there was green trees and a purple car and everything over here, you could see that even with the full 256 colors, it just doesn't work very well. File size wise, it's not too bad, and you can compare your different file sizes in here. So our original image has over 5 meg. This one only has 281K, which is even better than a low quality JPEG, but again, we're giving up the difference of only having a very limited color palette. Furthermore, if you did have an image that had the need for going with a limited color palette to get a very small image, you can now do that with a PNG. So you can almost cross this one off the list unless you need an animated, a simple animation. Let's spend some time comparing the PNG to a JPEG. And we would probably never use a JPEG at this poor a quality. In fact, let's just go back over here and set up what's probably the most typical would be high setting, which gives us actually, I typically go a little higher than that, at least 80. In fact, let's go 90 because that's what Generator uses. So here we have a JPEG set up to 90 quality and a PNG that supports transparency. If we compare the file size, we see that the JPEG is clearly the winner here. However, what if we didn't need transparency on the PNG? Still, the JPEG is the winner here. And you really don't see any difference in image quality at this size and at this amount of zoom. And by the way, even though this says ping 24, when you turn transparency on, still says ping 24, but that's what people refer to as a ping 32, meaning that extra 8 bits of data is for the transparency. And if you did want to see how low you can go with the ping, we can change it over to ping 8, and that's where we get that limited color palette, and we could go down to just a couple different colors to try to generate that output. And you can see that that comes at a cost, but if you just had a very simple logo, you might consider going with a ping 8. We look at the file size, we can see it's considerably smaller here. If you were just working on a one-off image, you certainly could save it right from this dialog box. Like, let's say for example that you like this ping, then all you'd have to do is click save here, and it would save out the one that you selected. However, my workflow that I've been showing you is to use Adobe Generator, and we can also achieve the same things without going into this dialog box. In fact, let's take a look at that. So let's say that we wanted to save this out as the different options that we talked about. So first of all, we'll go to Save As, and let's say we didn't need the transparency and we just wanted to do a JPEG. So we select JPEG, click Save. Yeah, we'll go ahead and replace that. So then the only real choices you have in here is the quality. It's kind of unfortunate that there's like 3 different ways that it measures the quality. Sometimes you see from 1 to 10. In this case, you see from 1 to 12. But I would typically recommend that, if quality on the web is important to you, that you stay up, at least around 9 when you have from 1 to 10, and that you stay about right here in this dialog box. The format options, just baseline standard is all that you need, and then you would just click OK, and that would get you your JPEG. To save a ping, very similar. You're going to select ping from this option, or PNG, and we're going to click save. And then you have this choice for compression. If you go with the defaults in this menu, you're typically fine. This is a little bit odd the way this reads, but what this means when they're talking about slow here is they mean how long it takes to save, which is typically not an issue on today's computers. This will make the file size just a little bit smaller by applying a compression that's not harmful like the JPEG one. However, I'd still keep with that same workflow that I mentioned, is as you're saving your files and building and working on them, save as PSD. That way you get to keep all your layers and all that good stuff, but only when you're ready to export these for the web would you make these choices. The other thing is this interlacing. You can choose interlace. This is kind of an oddity. If you choose it, it makes your file size bigger, but when someone is looking at it on the web, it builds kind of like a low quality version of it at first as it's downloading. So it makes it seem like the image is taking less time to upload onto the website because it's building before your eyes. However, you're making the image bigger in the process of doing that, which could potentially add to slowing it down. So you would just click OK here to finish saving this image. And let's talk about maybe kind of summing this up, or workflows. It would be very convenient to just pick one file format to always use, but as you can probably figure out, it is better to just educate yourself and pick the ones that make more sense. So you can pause it and read through these, but I think we covered that quite adequately. And then the newest format on the scene is SVGs, and we've talked about how to export an SVG using Generator. Now, it only makes sense to export as an SVG or use SVGs for vector graphics, which are the ones that are created in Photoshop that don't use bitmaps. And you will see these become more and more popular, especially for things like simple graphics, like this kind of stuff that you create in Illustrator, simple logos. The beauty of it is they scale without losing their quality. And we can generate these right from Illustrator. The best way is to go File, Export, even though you can save them, but export makes them more friendly for the web. and just going with the defaults is fine, is what shows up here after you